Right now on the Daily Debrief, dirty details of the alleged sexual misconduct of former Today Show host Matt Lauer. We break down the law. Plus, a co-defendant takes the stand in the murder of a Florida law professor.
Did you have anything to do with the murder of Dan Markel?
No, ma'am.
What's it mean for the other man facing charges? And what about those phone calls?
I want it flushed. I made it clear I want the problem flushed.
The defendant tries to explain them.
You have no idea what he was talking about.
No idea what he's talking about.
The Daily Debrief brings you the day in court. It's Wednesday, October 9th.
Good evening, everybody. New details tonight about the firing of NBC Today Show host Matt Lauer. A book by investigative reporter Ronan Farrow says Lauer raped a colleague at the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi, Russia. The colleague, Brooke Nevels, says it was non-consensual because she was too drunk to consent and because she said no. In a 3-page letter, Lauer said everything was consensual and that his affair with Nevels continued for 9 months. He also says Nevels worked for Meredith Vieira, not NBC News, and was never his subordinate. Nevels says her affair with Lauer was transactional in nature. She also says she told colleagues and superiors at NBC about Lauer, but that nothing happened until after movie producer Harvey Weinstein was accused of sexual misconduct in 2017. After Nevels got Meredith Vieira involved and went to human resources, that is when the book says NBC fired Lauer. NBC reiterated that it fired Lauer within 24 hours of learning of the complaint. Let's bring this to our panel of attorneys right now. Eklund Mercy, Mike Korabanix, Gigi Gonzalez. Eklund, I'll start with you. From a perspective of employment law here, is there culpability, is there liability for NBC, and if so, why?
I don't think so. He stated that it was a Meredith's personal assistant, so I don't see there being any connection. I don't know if NBC has some type of outside of work type clause or, morality clause, so I can't speak to that. But what I can speak to is I'm kind of bothered. I do not like it when cases are tried in the court of public opinion. At this point in time, she stated that she was too drunk. So that can, so that goes to consent. There's a lot of things that are murky. And even with, Me Too, Matt Lauer still has the right, to be innocent until proven otherwise. So I'm not a fan of trying to try this case in front of the court of public opinion. We need more information in order for me to give any opinion on that.
Gigi Gonzalez, there's been no litigation yet, but assuming that there is some, do you agree with Eklund's assessment? Do you agree that NBC potentially wouldn't have liability here?
Potentially. My forte is in employment law, so I, like Eklund said, there may be some clauses in his contract that prevent him from mingling with his peers or what have you. I will say this, though, accusations and actions are life-ruining. And in the face of Me Too, we have to take all accusations seriously, and we should have been taking them seriously from here on out. But without an investigation, these accusations are life-ruining for the accused.
Well, look, I mean, there was some kind of an investigation. That's why they ultimately pulled Matt Lauer, arguably their biggest star, out of the chair. Mike Korabanix, I'll bring this in your direction. I know that we're sort of swimming outside the normal criminal law lane here, but what do you make of this? We've got accusations, we had a termination. Clearly, NBC thought something was wrong here.
Well, there's one common thread through any sort of investigation is you have to have facts and proof. NBC obviously had some concerns because they got rid of Matt Lauer. I think the question is going to be, at what point and at what time were they aware of these allegations? I mean, they did appear, according to the book, to have happened during an NBC assignment covering the Olympics. I think an investigation is going to be crucial here.
Yeah, and we had the accusation in the book, at least, that superiors were told about it, but that it wasn't until after the Weinstein matter that something actually happened. Obviously, a lot to talk about with these explosive accusations. We will keep on that story. Also, the defense has the case of the alleged murder of a Florida law professor. Let's move to that case now. Victim Dan Markel was in a tense custody battle with his ex-wife, Wendy Adelson. Prosecutors have argued in court that the fight was a potential motive for murder. Neither the ex-wife nor her relatives have been charged, and the ex-wife testified with immunity that she knew nothing about any alleged plan to kill her ex-husband. The defendants are Sigfredo Garcia and Kathryn McDonough. McDonough blames Garcia. Garcia says he didn't do it. A third defendant, Luis Rivera, cooperated with authorities and took the stand. He says on the day of the murder, he and Sigfredo Garcia followed Dan Markel. The defense attacked this co-defendant for possible gang associations and seemed to suggest gang involvement in the killing. Defendant Kathryn McDonough took the stand and said she was in a relationship with Charlie Adelson, the brother of the victim's ex-wife, who prosecutors have suggested in court was somehow behind Dan Markel's killing.
Now, when Mr. Adelson, Charlie Adelson, started calling you, was it clear to you that he wanted something more than a friendship?
Yes.
Did he make that clear to you?
I mean, I assumed.
Was he pretty upfront about his attraction to you?
Yes.
Now, in the beginning, did you immediately start dating him?
No.
Did this progress over time?
Well, it's hard to like have two children, and my daughter was really, I mean, both of them were really small at that time, so I don't have that luxury to just go out whenever I can.
But you did eventually have a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship?
Yes.
All right. Was there any discussion ever about marriage?
No. I think he's always busy. I think he's always, he has a lot of patients, like all over Miami-Dade and Broward. Okay. And then even further up. I don't know how far his patients go.
But he travels up
and down, yeah.
All through Dade, West Palm,
yes,
all those counties to do his specialty, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, did you see each other every day?
At that time?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Right. But you did talk every day?
Yes. How
would you describe Mr. Charlie Adelson in terms of how much he talks?
A lot.
Were you still having a sexual relationship with Mr. Garcia?
Yes, ma'am.
How often?
Whenever we would kind of get back together, I guess.
To your knowledge, did Mr. Garcia know about your relationship with Mr. Adelson?
Yeah.
Okay. Did Mr. Adelson know about your relationship with Mr. Garcia?
Yes.
After discussing the trouble that love triangle caused, McDonough's attorney then started asking questions about the day Dan Markel was, in her words, executed in Tallahassee.
Did Mr. Garcia ever tell you that he was leaving town?
No, ma'am.
Do you remember Mr. Garcia ever telling you, I'm going up north, I'm going to Tallahassee?
No, ma'am.
Would Tallahassee have stuck out in your mind?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And apart from being here for the past 3 years, had you ever been to Tallahassee before?
No, ma'am.
Okay. This is your first time here?
First time.
If I asked you right now what you were doing on July 18th of 2014, would you be able to tell me?
No, ma'am.
So this defendant claims to know nothing about what her co-defendant was doing the day Dan Markel was shot and killed. What about Charlie Adelson? Well, McDonough says he never told her about Markel's murder and never asked her to pass money related to Markel's death.
Do you remember having a conversation with Charlie Adelson about his brother-in-law being in an accident? Does that sound familiar to you?
It sounds familiar, yeah.
Okay, so you do at some point remember him referencing his brother-in-law or ex-brother-in-law?
I believe so, yes.
As best as you can remember, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, try to describe for us what it is that he said to you in terms of referencing his ex-brother-in-law being in an accident.
Well, that was it. Like, I remember, or trying to remember, that there was one day that he had called and he said, yeah, like his brother-in-law got in an accident. I don't know if it was a car accident or an accident.
Okay, do you remember, does car accident, does that sound familiar, or you don't know?
I don't know.
All right. Did he tell you that his brother-in-law had been shot twice?
No, ma'am.
Okay. He didn't tell you he had been murdered?
No, ma'am.
Would you have remembered that if he told you?
I would remember that.
Were you ever trying to deliver money to Luis Rivera and Mr. Garcia at Jessica Rodriguez's house?
No, ma'am.
Was there ever a time that you picked up money from Mr. Adelson's house that was stapled?
No, ma'am.
And that you then delivered that to Mr. Garcia?
No, ma'am.
Or delivered it to Mr. Rivera?
No, ma'am.
McDonough also said the only reason she talked on the phone with cooperating defendant Luis Rodriguez was through efforts to find her co-defendant and the father of her children, Sigfredo Garcia. Now, one of the state's theories is that McDonough was paid to participate in the killing of Dan Markel. She testified about her co-defendant making money, but through drugs, not through murder.
Were you aware that Mr. Garcia was selling cocaine?
No, ma'am.
Objection, Judge.
Overruled.
Did Mr. Garcia have a steady form of legitimate employment?
No, ma'am.
But he would show up on occasion and just give you cash.
Yes, ma'am.
Why would you take it without asking where it came from?
It's for my kids.
Did you have some suspicion about the location or where that money came from?
No.
Okay. But you just didn't ask?
Yeah.
Our panel of criminal defense attorneys is back here tonight. Mike Korobanek's in New York, Eklund Mercy in Atlanta, of course, Gigi Gonzalez in Miami. So Gigi, what do you make of this defense here? It's basically, I don't know anything about this murder of this law professor. I don't know what everybody was doing. They never told me they were going anywhere. What do you make of it? Does this make any sense?
No, it doesn't. And, at the beginning of this case, the co-defendant Rivera testified to what exactly played out throughout this scheme, this conspiracy. And at that point, maybe you can have some sort of, defense that this is an unreliable witness. However, his testimony was followed up with a cell phone evidence expert that detailed all of the calls that all of the defendants, including McDonough, was making to all of these players. So it is really difficult for her to sit on that stand and say she doesn't know anything when she was in direct contact with all of the players during the time of this conspiracy and murder.
Oh, she's saying, well, we were talking about other things, and we're going to get to those phone calls in a minute. Mike Korobanek's here, don't know anything about what Garcia was up to. There may have been, some accident here or something like that, that we're hearing from Charlie Adelson telling her, that this death was an accident, not a murder. Does that add into this at all?
She should have sat next to her lawyer, exercised her Fifth Amendment right, and she wouldn't be having the problem she's going to have with this. The only thing she may have done in that testimony is helped her co-defendant, because her attorney brought out some things that I think were highly prejudicial with the cocaine dealing that shouldn't be part of this trial, and I think that could present the problem, and she may have done the co-defendant a favor, but she did none to herself.
Well, look, she's trying to say, hey, look, yeah, he wound up with money, he gave it to me, but it didn't come from this crime, it came from something else he was up to, and I know nothing about it. Eklund, again, she's trying to say, I'm the innocent one here. If everybody else around me is involved in an alleged criminal conspiracy or activity, don't blame me for it, blame them.
Yeah, it's everybody else, not me defense. I don't know how that's going to work out. I'm going to have to echo Mike and say that I would have gladly told my client to have several seats right next to me. However, I would say that what she did bring out with the drugs actually helps her co-defendant. If I was, Garcia's attorney, I'm concocting a story that it sounds like Garcia could have been Adelson's pusher, could have been Adelson's drug dealer. Maybe that was the connection. And then Adelson could have went further and connected with the actual killer, the one that they gave the deal to. So if I was the defense, I'm in, we're in a huddle trying to piece together this reasonable doubt for this jury.
Yeah, and the judge has refused all requests to sever these cases and try these defendants separately, even though she's pointing the finger at him, basically. Well, still ahead tonight here on The Debrief, we're going to head back to that Dan Markel trial. We'll find out how defendant Kathryn McDonough deals with those wiretap phone calls, which the state says contain code talk about murder. Prosecutors are arguing that Kathryn McDonough talked in code to Charlie Adelson about the murder of Dan Markel. McDonough says she was confused about what Adelson was saying in those wiretapped phone calls we've heard many times over again, and she had no idea what it meant.
Yeah, I was confused.
Did you have any idea or know what was going on?
No, ma'am.
And Mr. Adelson told you that someone walked up to his mom and referenced an ex-girlfriend.
Yes, ma'am.
But at this point, you don't even know if it's really you.
Yes, because he said ex-girlfriend.
Okay. You even asked him who said I did anything wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was something about an exchange of a paper.
Okay.
And that he was going to show it to you when he saw you the next day. You remember that?
Yes.
Okay. And he said, you're my best friend. I'll show you what it is, right?
Yes, ma'am.
What happened the very next day?
When we met up in Dolce Vita?
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean, like what happened? Like, we went to Dolce Vita and he was just like talking.
Did he show you a paper with Dan Markel's face on it?
No, ma'am.
Did you see any paper with a phone number on it?
No, ma'am.
Anything with any numbers on it?
No, ma'am. He didn't show me any paper.
He didn't show you any paper?
He just started going off on scenarios and I kind of just lost them.
Did he mention anything to you about a homicide out of Tallahassee?
No, ma'am.
Did he mention anything about his ex-brother-in-law being murdered?
No, ma'am.
He kept that from you?
Yes, ma'am.
McDonough also said Charlie Adelson tried to get her to call a number, but she wasn't sure why, and so she didn't call the number. She had her co-defendant call the number instead. But as to Adelson, McDonough said he was, quote, paranoid and losing it. She even suggested maybe Adelson was discussing real estate.
Would you have stopped using your phone if you were involved in criminal activity?
Of course.
So why are you yelling at him on the phone like that?
Why was I yelling at Charlie?
Yeah.
Like that? He's just, because he keeps on, it's the same thing over and over. I don't know how many different phone calls. Like, frankly, I don't even know if this is all the phone calls, because it seems like times jump and dates jump. So where's the calls in the middle of like the phone log that we received? So it just, I was frustrated because it was over and over and over, the same thing, different scenarios, and it's just like, I thought he was losing it.
Now, is it weird for Mr. Adelson to be acting all paranoid?
No, he's usually a paranoid person.
Why?
I don't know exactly why, but he just always has different scenarios for situations, and he thinks it's kind of like a know-it-all. Like, he thinks he knows.
Did he ever try to come off to you like, talk about, ties to the Russian mafia or anything like that?
I think I've heard him like mention something like that before, but.
Were you talking about real estate ventures, if you remember?
For that specific phone call, I might not have been.
Is it possible that you were talking in code?
Probably.
Why would you be talking in code about real estate stuff?
I was probably next to Yendra at work.
And where does Yendra work?
In realty.
In a realty office.
Mm-hmm.
That's just some testimony about some of the phone calls. What about the calls between McDonough and her co-defendant?
For the phone call where you are in an argument with Mr. Garcia, we heard it played in court, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you know what Mr. Garcia meant when he said, the less you know, the better?
No.
Okay. Why didn't you ask him any questions apart from the fact that he hung up on you, but did you ever follow up what he meant by that?
No, because we were probably arguing at that time, and he just never really tells me anything, like to that extent, just, Katie, you don't need to know anything.
Why didn't you call the police?
It really wasn't my place to call the police. I
know
I heard myself saying it because at that time I was already frustrated at the situation, but for me to, like, what am I going to call the police and say, I have a friend that's getting threatened? I have a friend's mom that's getting threatened and might have said my name. They're going to think I'm crazy.
To the phone call where Charlie Adelson said something about a problem being flushed, McDonough says she doesn't know what he meant.
Now, when you say he was referencing you want the problem flushed, was that in anything directly related to what was going on, or he was just saying that?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
You have no idea what he was talking about.
No idea what he was talking about.
Is that something that was very common when you're talking to Charlie Adelson?
Yes.
Our guests are back one last time tonight. Eklund, Mercy, let's talk about trial advocacy here. These were all direct examination questions, but they sounded leading. Why is her attorney basically putting words in her mouth?
Because she can. There was only one objection through that whole line of questioning. And I was like, well, keep going. What we found was the defense attorney actually did a great job. They basically showed that there was more evidence against Charlie Adelson, who is not being charged, than against McDonough. And that the expectation for McDonough to call the police. The fact that the person who has the connection to all of it is not being charged, that is what I think the defense was trying to put out there. And then they also put out the fact that he had ties to the Russian mafia to also show that maybe the fear of the Edelsons and the fear of going against them. So, I mean, this case, it's very interesting. I'm curious to see what the defense will do during closing.
Exactly. This is complicated. Gigi Gonzalez, what did you make of the tactic when there was a really tough question in there of the witness, the defendant, sitting there and basically saying, repeat the question back to me, huh? What are you talking about? Was that a stall tactic? Was there something we could read into that?
You know, it could have been a stall tactic, and it could have been just nerves. You know, she is on trial for her life, and every word that she says is going to be considered in her guilt or innocence. So, you know, I'm going to chalk it up to nerves and just trying to make sure that she says what she needs to say to protect herself.
The prosecutor's going to say she's trying to come up with a lie there. I'm sure there's another way to characterize this. Mike Korobanix, let's wrap this up here in New York. She's basically saying, I don't know what anybody meant in these phone calls. We were talking in code, but it was about real estate transactions. It wasn't about murder, flushing someone. Well, you know, there's some bathroom humor in there. It didn't have anything to do with actually murdering someone. The person I was on the phone with is, quote, paranoid. He's, quote, losing it. Quote, I lost him in the conversation, didn't ask clarifying questions. Are these believable answers?
I think you're ready to give the prosecution summation tomorrow, Aaron. If I were them, I'd call you in.
Oh, no. I'm staying here. I'm staying here.
I really was not impressed by her testimony, and I think the leading nature by the defense attorney really might have hurt them.
A lot of opinions about this case. It's a complicated case. We are going to follow it in closings tomorrow, along with new cases happening this week. Thanks to the panel, and thanks to those of you watching. We appreciate it. We'll see you tomorrow.